Hello, and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Nikias on, and the reason this podcast is so powerful for every single one of you ladies listening to this is because he's been trying to get bulky for pretty much his whole life. He's wanted to get this shapely, defined, muscly, sculpted look. And the funny thing is that he's still struggling very much with getting the gains that he wants. And that is the point. Building muscle is fucking hard. I'm sorry, but it is. You are not going to get bulky. It's just that most people take the wrong approaches. And I laughed when we were kind of discussing the path that we want to go to start this, because I was just rambling on in something that I wanted to put out into the social media interwebs. And part of it said that so many people are so focused on the macros of their nutrition. As an example, how much should I eat? What should I eat? What's this? What's that? Like, what are things that I should avoid? What are things that I should have? But not enough people are focused enough on the training aspect, because it doesn't matter what the hell you do with your diet if the training isn't there. But at the same time, you can be on the best training program and still not build muscle, because it's not about what you do. It's about how you do it. And if more people focused on prioritizing for performance, it's kind of funny that you would actually get the physique you always wanted versus trying to optimize for losing the most fat possible.
First of all, thank you for having me on for the second time. And I understand Nikias is a weird name. It's an originally Greek name. So my name is Nikias, and I have been certified nutritionist and online trainer for over half a decade now. And as Ruby was saying, I haven't really been trying to build muscle my whole life, but I have been trying to build muscle ever since I got into bodybuilding, which was in 2018. Actually, to give you, dear listeners, some perspective on who I am and what I've been through, so that some of you may relate. Growing up, I was overweight, and I was made fun of for it. And I wasn't really training. I did a year in the gym following a cookie cutter program that they give you for free. You know, a lot of machines. I didn't really understand what I was doing. I didn't build much muscle through that. And that was my entire experience as a teenager. What I did get a more than thorough experience with was weight loss. And the key term here is weight loss. I don't want to say fat loss, because I was overtly focused on losing as much weight as I could. And I did, because I'm very stubborn. And unfortunately, as a result of that, I was channeling all this energy that I have, this stubbornness, the resolve, determination, hard-working attitude I have, into the wrong targets, and I developed a restrictive eating disorder. So actually for almost a decade, I suffered from an eating disorder whereby I was under-eating and I was over-exercising and focusing excessively on cardio, purely as a form of maintenance of all the weight loss that I'd achieved at that point, and I was underweight. Then when I discovered bodybuilding, that was for the first time an awakening for me to the idea that I could build my body up instead of trying to break it down. So I began studying hypertrophy specific training, meaning training that's specific to build muscle. And right before we started the recording with Ruby, I was telling her that whenever somebody talks about wanting to build muscle, they are wondering what the best approach would be from a dietary perspective. So they want to know, what is the best fat loss diet to also build muscle? Or if they're interested in going into a calorie surplus, so to gain weight, to make building muscle an easier process, they're wondering, what should my surplus be? But the main priority that you want to think about when you're trying to build muscle is training, because nutrition is permissive of muscle growth. So the right approach to nutrition is going to make the muscle building process easier. But what triggers muscle growth is training. And it's important to understand the right approach to nutrition, but it's of secondary importance to understanding how to train. And as Ruby correctly said, building muscle is a really difficult process. And it's triggered by training that's not only there. You can't just go to the gym and do your sessions. So it can't just be present. It needs to be there, but it needs to be hard. And I think it's important to define what hard actually means, because there are many ways that you can make training hard, but not all of them are effective to build muscle. Effective training is always going to be hard, but hard training is not always going to be effective. You want your hard training to be hypertrophy specific hard, meaning you're going to need enough muscle. Yeah, I wish, right? But anyway, you're gonna need enough volume for each of your target muscles, so the muscles you're trying to grow. And volume is simply a fancy term for how many hard, challenging sets are you doing per body part over a period of time. Usually we think about it in terms of weekly volume, so weekly sets per desired muscle that are taken close enough to failure. And the second priority to make training hypertrophy specific hard is to use the right form in every single repetition that you do to stimulate the desired muscle. Because one way to make training hard is to lift a lot of weight. But when you're lifting more weight than the desired muscle can handle, you're going to have to compensate with other muscles, which you may or may not want to grow. So imagine that you have a certain amount of stimulus from a set, right? And if your form was correct to target solely the muscles you wanted to grow, that stimulus would go 100% into those muscles. Now, if you're overcompensating, imagine that you're spreading that stimulus across multiple muscles. So now each muscle gets maybe 25% of that stimulus. So you're still going to grow, but you're going to grow a lot more slowly. And I mention this because I suffered from ego lifting for many years, and I still struggle with it every now and again, because who doesn't like to say, hey, I lift 100 kilos, 200 kilos. I love to be able to say that I am strong. But if your target muscle can't handle it, you're strong because the rest of your body is compensating, and that's not the most efficient way to build muscle. And finally, I've already sorry, go ahead.
I want to say something here because I feel like this is something that most people have seen me say without actually having context to it. When I say lifting heavy doesn't always mean you're lifting for muscle growth. Training hard, training heavy doesn't always mean that muscle growth is going to come out the other end. Like, yes, there is, like we mentioned briefly, a nutrition element to it, but that we'll touch on at the end. The training, yes, it's the thing that lights the match, but I think a thing that sets even myself back like you is this whole progressive overload thing. And so many people do not take it into its proper context, which is why I wanted to really just bring this out and stay here for a while, because it's not about progressively overloading every week. You don't chase progressive overload. You don't aim to progressively overload every week. It is a byproduct of you getting stronger. It is a byproduct of there being muscle built. And that doesn't happen on a week-to-week basis. That does not happen on a month-to-month basis if you've been training for a long period of time. Shit takes time. And it also depends on what the exercise is. I mean, if you think that you can, I had someone say to me, which sparked a post that I made that went crazy. Someone said to me, I think I'm going to have to settle with these weights for the next couple of weeks and then I'll increase it. I'm like, good luck with that. Try a couple of years. Actually, try several years. And we were talking about lateral raises. That is one thing in particular that you are going to be hard pressed to ever increase your dumbbells. And it's because that's how it's designed. There are other ways for you to get the stimulus. And the thing is, it's not about what weight you lift that leads to the body. It's about the body is the end outcome. And then you come back from there. So what do we need to get from that? We need progressive stimulus. We need progressive tension to get as much tension in that muscle as possible. And that is done a myriad of ways within the same program in itself. And this is why program design is an art. I want you to ramble on about this point in particular before you go on to the third point, because you can be doing the same weight of something for a long period of time, but that is like one ingredient that you've used to bake a cake. All the ingredients together have made that cake. That is why the cake rose up. Without the yeast, it wouldn't have risen up. Like there might be this trigger one thing, like the main exercise that has led to a lot of the growth. And no, it won't be the hip thrust. And the reason I mentioned that is because I saw someone using some stupid EMG machine at the gym trying to find what muscles were most activated and things. I'm like, who cares? Just find the position that you can lift the most weight with the right technique and all that kind of stuff. And realize that just because something is really high in the amplitude of muscle activation does not mean it's more conducive for growth, which you and I both know that. The RDLs would be way better for glute growth than the hip thrusts because that's in a lengthened range. The hip thrusts are in a shortened range, but it doesn't mean to completely discard the shortened range. It's part of the program thing. But anyway, people need to stop doing a Ruby when Ruby gets up in her own head as well. So yeah, I know I'm human as well, but it can be so easy to get caught up in chasing the weights and lose your form in the process. But at the same time, you don't want to aim for so much perfection that you don't actually allow yourself to push enough to get the effort out of it. Like, this is where the balancing act comes in. This is where it is so important. Yes, we can both say that, because I know you do the same with your podcast. We'll both say it. Like, this is where someone like Nikias, I'll get there eventually. it's the accent. But anyway, that's where Nikias and myself as coaches are fundamental to stopping you spinning your wheels. But I'll let you take over now because that is so important.
So I'm glad that you brought up the importance of striving for progress in the final comment that you've made, because I don't want anyone to take away from this podcast that they shouldn't try to increase their reps or increase their load over time. If you take that kind of mindset, then you're going to sandbag your sets, meaning that you're not going to train hard enough. So you do want to step into the gym thinking that you're going to attack those weights, that you're going to do your best to improve your performance over time, while also accepting that depending on how experienced you are, it may take longer than a single workout. Typically, if you're just starting out, you may be able to increase the reps and increase the load on a workout to workout basis. I could go on a tangent on how that's typically because of neuromuscular adaptation, meaning when you start out doing an exercise you've never done before, your nervous system doesn't know how to do it. So it's learning to recruit all the muscles that it needs in the right order and fire each muscle cell in the right order to perform that lift. So while it's learning that, you find that your performance increases quite quickly. But once the neuromuscular adaptations are over, the hypertrophy adaptations begin and the strength adaptations begin. And typically neuromuscular adaptations can take up to 10 weeks in complete beginners. And that's when, so in 8 to 10 weeks, you're going to develop those, and then you start making progress at a rate that's in keeping with your actual level of muscle mass and strength. And the more muscle mass and strength you develop, sadly, lifting is a game of diminishing returns. Therefore, the slower your progress is going to be in terms of weight lifted and reps completed, because you need more and more stimulus in order to get more of these adaptations. So it takes longer to accumulate that kind of stimulus. So on one hand, you do want to strive for progress in the gym, but on the other hand, you want to acknowledge that it's not always going to be as quick as it will be at the very beginning of your training. So you're always striving to train hard, but you're also keeping your focus on what's important for muscle growth, which isn't increasing weight and reps every single workout. It's to stimulate the muscle fibers within the muscles that you want to grow. And Ruby, I was listening to one of your podcasts just the other day, and the guest you had on called progressive overload, progressive adaptation. And I really like that term because I believe that progressive overload is a little bit outdated and may mislead people in that they're going to think overload, load, weight on the bar is important. And the weight on the bar is important if your target muscles can handle it. So yes.
That's why I personally like saying it's progressive tension for that reason.
Exactly, because there's a difference between lifting a certain amount of load and stimulating your muscles. So when we're talking about stimulus for hypertrophy specifically, so for the purpose of building muscle, from research we know that we're going to get enough stimulus from doing enough sets over a period of time. But on a per session basis, we need to use that form that I was talking about, whereby we are placing the majority of the stimulus, if not all of it, on the target muscles, and we need to train close enough to failure, muscular failure, which is the point at which your muscles are maximally fatigued. The target muscles are completely fatigued. You try to complete a repetition with the same form that you started with, and you simply cannot do it. You, for example, let's say you're doing a shoulder press. You're pressing the dumbbells up, you stop halfway, you try to grind through it, but you have to put the dumbbells down. That's when you've maximally stimulated the musculature that you're trying to train with that exercise, and you cannot possibly do any more. Now, it doesn't mean that we always need to go to failure. We know from research that we can stop within about 2 reps from that point, but most people never get even anywhere close to that level of intensity. So I
That's
don't
why
normally.
that's why I say usually say chase actual failure, because most people
Yes,
see it failing, but it's not actually failing. And
yes.
I quickly wanted to touch on the effort part. The honest effort, a lot of people can reach this point, but it's not true honest effort because you're missing other components of an effective program, i.e., resting enough between sets, i.e., this is where performance nutrition comes in, because maybe your max 100 could have been way higher on an absolute scale if you fueled before it, if you were well rested, if you took in all these other considerations that come to your performance. Like honest effort, this is a sliding scale that you can aim to optimize, but also be okay with the resilience aspect when it does slide backwards, when you have a bad night's sleep because you're a human, things like that.
It's interesting that you bring up resting enough between sets, because what's important to understand is, and that's the reason why I specifically call failure muscular failure. What's important to understand is that within a set, the reason why you stop moving that weight isn't only muscular fatigue or failure. Sometimes you may stop the set because your cardiovascular system is excessively taxed, and I mean your heart and your lungs. And this happens, for example, when you're not resting long enough between sets. So you do have to stop, and you feel like you've exerted yourself, and you have exerted yourself. You've trained really hard in that set. But what you fatigued is your heart and your lungs. And what you need to fatigue to grow muscle is your muscles. And these are separate systems. So if you're doing, for example, a lot of exercises, a lot of sets, so you might be listening to this and thinking, I am checking out the volume box. It may not be effective volume, because to fit all these sets in, you're resting 30 seconds, and then the limiting factor in that set is your cardiovascular system. You need to train so that the limiting factor in a set is your desired muscle. So you stop that set because that muscle forces you to stop.
I'm going to feed off that one now. Another thing is that there's no way that you would be recovering from that in time for the next session either. And that is an issue, because then that factors into the whole honest effort thing. You can't progressively adapt from what you haven't yet recovered from. But I would also probably post something on when you said the muscular failure, because today I was training with someone and I didn't rest enough between one of my sets for my leg extensions, and I fell short by 2 reps because my legs were just fried. And usually I can get those 2 reps. It's just that I didn't rest long enough. And it's like I could have got 2 extra reps of volume if I had rested long enough before that last set. So like these things matter a lot. And it's not about having a set prescription time for your rest times. I don't usually prescribe things unless I'm trying to get a particular metabolic stimulus out of you, or just a particular athletic thing from you. Otherwise, it's rest until you are honestly sure that you can give your best the next set so that you can put in honest effort. Because when you're not resting enough, you are not giving your best that session, even though it feels hard, even though it feels heavy. It's just different as an experience. And this is going to feed into what Nikias is going to be talking about at the end of the podcast, and that we don't even know how to experience within our bodies when it comes to my blouses are starting to feel tight. My tights are starting to feel tight. So stay tuned for that, but carry on.
It's not really about rest intervals. It's about understanding what makes training effective. Because if we look at this from a different perspective, recently there has been some research done into rest intervals relative to volumes completed. And it's true that if you rest less time, you can complete more volume. But when the researchers compared the higher volume with shorter rest intervals to the lower volume with the increased rest interval, the outcome was roughly similar. So you could get the same amount of stimulus by doing more sets and resting less time, or by doing fewer sets and resting longer. So you are welcome to choose. Obviously, there is a limit to this, in that, as we've been saying so far, you need to be still recovered enough to give each set enough effort to reach muscular failure and recover from that set, but also from the session as a whole. However, this has been found in research, so technically you could do more sets and rest less time if that was your preference. However, I do believe that the rest interval was at least 60 seconds, even for the shorter rest periods. So there is such a thing as too short of a rest interval. Don't quote me on the 60 seconds, but I don't believe it was as short as 30 or less. So anyway, my point is that you could choose to do more and rest less, but we also have lives. The majority of us aren't professional athletes who can spend 5 hours in the gym every day. If you have an hour to train, it makes a lot more sense to me to do fewer sets, rest longer, and take each set to muscular failure and get roughly the same stimulus versus doing double the sets, half the rest, and it takes you twice as long.
We also aren't in a research lab where people are forcing us to failure for those last sets of the very session, where usually the typical person, especially if you're a woman over 40, where like women over 40, you guys have less recoverability. You have hormones at play as well. You are not going to be pushing your absolute maximum at the end of a session unless there is someone grinding in your face, yelling you to fail. So we need to take everything into context there as well. I love the points you brought up.
That's a really good point, Ruby. It's called the lab effect, I believe. I don't. I say it's called as if it's a scientific term. I've heard a lot of scientists nowadays call it the lab effect, whereby because you're under supervision by researchers, you're training harder than you normally would on your own, and that is true. And therefore, I would struggle to imagine somebody on their own in the gym who's doing 20 sets per body part with 30 seconds rest, who's giving each individual set their all in order to build muscle. If that were the case, I could argue, yeah, okay, that is equivalent to doing less volume but resting longer. But the reality of it is, after 5 sets like that, your tongue is on the floor. You can't breathe. You are cursing whoever created that program for you. You are hoping that it's over, that it was over yesterday. You're not really focusing on muscular failure. And that is why I completely understand that you're frustrated, because you feel like you're working so hard, and you are, but the work you're doing is inefficient. And that's why you're not getting the outcome that you expect from the amount of effort that you're putting in. And it's simply because it's not that you're lazy or you're not putting in enough effort. It's that the effort is misplaced. So if you want to put your effort in the right place, you need enough volume per target muscle to grow, but also that you can progress with and recover from. You need the right form to stimulate the desired muscle, and you need to achieve a close proximity to failure. And for the majority of people, especially if you train 3 days per week, which is the average for a lot of people who are reasonably active, then you have 4 days out of the week that you can recover. Therefore, take each set to muscular failure, because you're going to have the time after to recover from that. Once you're training 4, 5, 6 days per week with appropriate volume and form, you may not need to go to failure on every single set, but you're still going to have to take each set very, very close to failure. But typically those people are also a little bit more experienced with training, so they find it easier to stop close enough to failure without taking the set to absolute failure, and they still get good results from that. But if you're listening to that and you cannot honestly say that you even know the difference between having 1 rep left before failure and having 2 reps left or 5 reps left, then you have to practice failure on pretty much the majority of the sets you do where it's safe, because otherwise you're simply not experienced enough to understand when that set has become effective. Most foolproof way to make a set effective is to simply take it to failure.
I honestly do encourage people to just take them to failure and you can do less but more effectively that way, and you don't have to second guess what you're doing. And I got one of my girls a 100 kilo PB on her leg press simply because of the fact that I was seeing her put in her logs 80 kilos times 10, 100 kilos times 12, 120 kilos times 12, and then 135 kilos times 13. I'm like, why are your reps going up? Why is your weight going up? These were all warm-up sets. I want you to start at 140 next time, bro. And she started at 140, and then she worked her way up again. I'm like, you just got yourself a 100 kilo PB, and you weren't even trying. Like, it was, yeah, it's like you guys can do so much more than you realize, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you at least film your stuff for a coach. Again, plugging for coaches, because like so many times, I'm sure you get it as well, people do not do full depth squats. People do not have proper hinges. People are not doing effective training to target that muscle because they haven't learned how to build that skill yet. And it's not your fault. Nobody is brought up to learn this stuff unless you went to school to study it for long enough. This is why getting a coach, even for a year, can pay dividends down the road, because then you don't have to spend money doing useless cycling around the block bullcrap, and you can actually drive to a direction. Anyway, that being said, I think we covered most of the most important parts about training, but honest effort comes a lot down to your nutrition as well. Because as an example, I used this example before as well. If you're on a low carb diet, things are going to feel really hard, but they're not going to be at the absolute level that they could be if you were fueling with carbs. If you went into a workout fasted versus fed, same thing. If you were in a deficit versus whether you're at maintenance or a surplus, same thing. And the mental aspect of that comes in as well, because I know mentally, if I'm not eating enough food, my performance immediately gets hit. I get hit really hard mentally with the fact that I'm in a diet. It's just the way that I personally respond. Most people just get it physically. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And short term, this is something that you already touched on before, that we wanted to talk about the short term and long term of this. And that in the short term, your pre-workout nutrition is probably the most important thing that you need to worry about. I think too many people fluff about with, you need an intra workout. I don't think anyone listening to this needs an intra workout. And I would argue that your post-workout nutrition is not as important as your pre-workout nutrition, but you still want to make sure that you're getting protein around anyway. But the thing that I want to leave my little spiel with is, had good training. I was training hard, training to failure, recovering from it, doing all the good shit, training my ass off. Do you want to know what the worst fate is? Training your butt off when you have the time. This was when I had the time to train 5 days a week, which now I think most people would benefit better from 4 anyway. But I was grinding my ass off 5 days a week without seeing the changes that, well, I did to start with. And then I didn't, because I was not eating enough. I spent most of the time, well, I was eating a lot of food, but for the work that I was doing, it was still putting me into a slight deficit, sometimes into a maintenance. And I was not seeing the changes that I wanted. Look back 2 years later and I looked the same. We don't want that for you. So now that's what we're going to start talking about. The importance of being at least maintenance calories, which is not 1,600 calories for the majority of you listening to this.
So you can look at nutrition to fuel performance from 2 different perspectives. And as Ruby introduced, I was going to talk about 2 time-bound perspectives, the long-term and the short-term. Over the long term, we are talking primarily about your calorie balance. So whether you are at maintenance calories, in a surplus, or in a deficit. And if you want to truly prioritize building muscle, then the best physiological environment to build muscle is a moderate surplus, whereby you are gaining weight, which means you are going to gain some muscle and some body fat. And that simply makes the muscle building process the fastest that it can get when paired with the appropriate training that we've just spent half an hour talking about, so I'm not going to go back there. Now, the second most efficient physiological environment to build muscle is your maintenance calories, whereby you're not gaining weight, but you're supporting effective training, so that over time your body composition is going to change. At the same weight, you're going to have more muscle mass. And if the weight on the scale is not moving, that can only happen if you lose something else, because you can't add something without changing the quantity. So if you're building muscle, you're adding muscle mass, then you are losing body fat. It's necessary if your weight stays roughly the same within a couple of pounds. That is less efficient than being in a moderate surplus because it takes longer. It's a route that you can go down if it works better within your lifestyle, and if Ruby wants to, I'm happy to talk about that, and when you might want to go into a surplus versus when you might want to stay at maintenance. They're both effective, the timeline is simply different. Now, the least effective... Go ahead.
Just because you mentioned the timeline part, this is what screws a lot of people over, because people are impatient as hell. The worst fate that you can give yourself is to play it safe. Like, the reason people are so scared, I would love you to go on about this one as well before we touch into the least effective. The reason people screw themselves up so much is because of everything we spoke about before. People focus on the wrong thing when it comes to building lean muscle tissue. That's number one. Number two is because of the bro bodybuilders online. There's three reasons. The bro bodybuilders online, bulk. I hate the word bulk. Let's think build, because when it comes to bulk, there's large surpluses attached, which is why you gain more fat, because you cannot force feed muscle growth, which is why, like he said, a slight surplus. And this is why being at least at maintenance, and this is where the real reverse diet starts. This is what I like calling the reverse diet. Not the deficit to maintenance bullshit. Just get out of the freaking diet and eat your maintenance calories. The rest is bullshit. It's just mental masturbation. Diet to maintenance. After the maintenance phase, that's when you can reverse diet up to find a surplus that allows you to perform at your best while building lean muscle tissue. Because most of you are impatient. Most of you are comparing yourselves to the online world. Most of you are seeing people on PEDs, aka illegal steroids, with Photoshop, with good genetics, which that could be a BBL, or it could be the fact that that's where she stores most of her body fat, which is why it looks like her glutes grew that much. Stop comparing your glutes. Glutes are largely genetic. Stop comparing your abs. They're largely genetic too. Like, those three things are the greatest things that are going to hold you back. But the worst fate is, like I said, not understanding your expectations need to be in line with what you are willing and not willing to do. And I have a client who were going to do a brief little diet phase for 3 to 4 weeks before bringing her out of one again. But the thing is, she's already pretty slight. And this is why I wanted you to talk about the maintenance and surplus later. She's already pretty slight. She didn't really build that much muscle eating in her maintenance calories because she needed to actually eat a lot more food because there was not really much of her to start with. And it's in these periods of times where we do need to learn the hard way and realize, I didn't actually have the muscle developed yet there to uncover. Now I know I can trust myself to push myself into a surplus, but I want to talk about why people stray away from the surpluses once you talk about the least effective as well.
So, what you said that you can't force feed muscle growth is something I talk about all the time. Because when we're looking at the very small amount of research we have on surpluses for muscle gain, what we can see is that when you compare a group of subjects that's in a larger surplus and a group of subjects that's in a smaller surplus over the same period of time doing the same training program, the outcome is that the people in the greater surplus gain more weight, but that's because they gain more body fat. The difference in muscle gained is not significant. So it may be an old school bodybuilding approach to try to eat more in order to increase the rate of muscle gain. And you might get immediate gratification because you're seeing the scale go up faster. And since you're eating that much, your lifts are also going up faster, but that doesn't mean that you are building more muscle. You are adding more weight to your body, which is why performance improves so fast, because a bigger body is going to be able to lift more weight than a smaller body. However, if you look at your relative strength ratio, so pound for pound, how strong are you? The relative strength ratio may be roughly unchanged because you simply haven't put on that much muscle in that short amount of time simply by eating more. Because, as I said at the beginning, the main stimulus for growth is your training, and you can make it easier to put on muscle by being in a moderate surplus, but you can't dictate the speed at which muscle growth occurs by eating at more or fewer calories. Now, to touch on the final and least efficient physiological environment to build muscle, that would be a calorie deficit. There are still situations in which you can actually build muscle mass in a deficit, but the rate at which you can do that is never going to be the same as when you are at least at maintenance calories, or even better, in a moderate surplus.
Yeah, I would argue most people can't really do that unless they have a lot of body fat to lose, especially because of the effective training thing and because of the impatience thing and the way that our brain is. It's trying to focus on two things at once versus just trying to maximize one path where you have the most anabolic process there is with fuel, or the most catabolic process there is, compounded by life stresses, compounded by inconsistency and all those other things. But I really want to talk about what stops people from seeing the lean body that they want, because let's face it, we all want to look good. We want to look lean and tight and toned. Most of us are so caught up with our legs because they're squishy. They're the things that always suck the most. And what do you know? It's the thing we complain about the most in getting bulky. My legs bulk up the most. And that is the biggest reason why you struggle, because that short-term discomfort is holding you back. And if you're someone who wears blouses, like, I don't even know if I would have the body I have today if I had to wear pants every day for work or blouses, because I never had to experience that when I was going through the transition out of my most body dysmorphic era of my life, because I always wore singlets and crop tops and shorts, so I didn't have to face that. But the reality is that your arms are going to expand. Your legs are going to expand, especially after a hard training session, especially in the middle of a training session, because it's full of blood, it's full of water, it's full of glycogen. If you guys are sort of experienced enough and you train really hard and then you go on holidays for a week and you don't train, you're going to feel like a skinny string bean because you probably lost weight, well, a little bit of weight if everything was the same, and your legs will look completely deflated. I had that experience every single time. I used to complain about, I lost muscle, because I went from having like the biggest, juiciest pump all the time to having little string bean legs. And it's a reality that you face. Like, if you have more body fat, you might not recognize it straight away. If you don't train as hard, you might not recognize it that same way. But that is the reality. No matter how much body fat you have, how little body fat you have, it's just that it's a lot more notable in the starts of your journey, especially when you're learning to train hard, especially when you go from suboptimal nutrition to eating carbs to fuel, especially when you go from under eating to eating enough, especially when you go from, I already said, suboptimal training, especially when you have a lot more body fat to start with. If you fit into one of those three categories, this shit's going to be harder for you, and wanting to just jump into a fat loss phase and rid the fat and focus on the fat aspect, but not the muscle building aspect, is going to keep you cycling around the same shit you've been cycling around for the whole of your life. Take it away.
So you're saying you want to talk about what holds people back the most from achieving the physique that they want. And this answer might surprise you, Ruby, but also the listeners, because I'm going to say that what's holding most people back is the relationship they have with their body before it even starts changing. And this is called your body image, meaning the feelings and the thoughts that you have about your body. It's not really about what your body truly looks like. It's how you perceive that it looks like based on your feelings and your thoughts. And the reason why I say that it's what holds people back the most is that a lot of people who are unsuccessful with changing their body composition start a training and nutrition program from a place of self-hatred, where they not only hate their body, but through their body they hate themselves, because they are diminishing themselves to a single aspect of their entire being, meaning their physical body. Your body is a vessel that carries you through life. It's not you. You are not your body. It's a part of you. And I'm not saying that you should love your body. You didn't choose your body when you were born. Believe me, I know, because I am a transgender man. I certainly did not choose to be born in a body that's physiologically female. So, yeah. Anyway, you didn't choose it. So you are allowed to not like certain parts of it. You're allowed to say, I don't like my nose. You're allowed to say, I don't like my belly. I am allowed to say, I don't like that I was born with boobs, because that doesn't vibe with what my brain feels should be right. That's why I recently had my boobs surgically removed. Yay me! So we are allowed to not love our body all the time. We're allowed to dislike certain parts of it. We are allowed to want to change certain parts of it. I do it surgically. You might want to do it with a lifestyle change to lose some fat from around your belly. What's important is that you do your best to separate your worth from what your body looks like, and that you take changing your body like you would take any other hobby. The way I like to think about it, I am extremely passionate about bodybuilding, which is the act of building muscle and losing body fat, the act of sculpting your physique. My clients call me Michelangelo because I was born and raised in Italy, and well, obviously Michelangelo is a sculptor and painter. Anyway, I am very passionate about that. But when it comes to my own body, and I am in the process of improving my body image like everyone else, because an important aspect to understand is that you don't just improve your body image and it's good forever. It will ebb and flow. You will have peaks and you will have troughs where you feel really good and you don't feel so good about your body image. So you always have to work towards a better body image. And something that really helps me and has helped me historically improve my own body image was to see my body as a sculpture that I am changing and I am manipulating with my nutrition and my training. But it's not who I am. It's not my worth. Whether my body changes the way I expect to by adding muscle or losing fat has no bearing on how good I feel or how worthy I feel of existence, of love, and of appreciation and respect from other people. And once you're able to reach a point where you don't have to love your body, you don't even have to like your body, but you need to respect your body, because that sack of bones and flesh is carrying you to the grave. If you did not have a body, you would not be here. So at the very least, if for no other reason than because it keeps you alive, that thing deserves your respect. That vessel deserves your respect. And once you truly build respect towards your body and you separate yourself from it, and I talk about it as if it's simple, it's not going to be an overnight job, but it is so worth it to go through that challenging phase of improving your body image, which I help my clients through when necessary. If you do that body image work first, you are going to remove an enormous obstacle towards achieving the body composition changes that you want. Funnily enough, at that point, you will not even care so much about changing your body anyway, anymore, because the reason why you do right now is that you think that it's the only way to gain that self-respect that you don't have, that self-confidence that you don't have, that respect from other people and love that you think you're not worthy of. But once you realize that that's not the case, because working through your body image leads to you realizing that there's so much more that you give to the world and that you can give to yourself than your body, that you eventually think to yourself, you know what, I don't really care if my body changes or not, because I already know I'm worthy for all these other reasons. But if you are passionate about bodybuilding like I am, you will still care about making those changes, because again, it will be a matter of improving upon a masterpiece, the masterpiece being your body, which is separate from you. And that's when
I was just going to say that part, just because I love that part so much. I want to just park it right there. It is so funny that once you have healed this relationship with your body, the whole process becomes so much easier, because guess what? Like I say, this is when you make decisions based off logic and reasoning, not based off emotion. That is when you get your best results ever, and you fall in love with the process. Because it wasn't until I finally accepted, like, I fought the process. I struggled so much for about 5 to 8 months. I can't exactly recall. Once I broke past that barrier, I look back at old photos of me, 6 kilos / 12 pounds heavier now, and I'm like, fuck, I was loving my life there. And I remember the process there, how grueling it was. But if I didn't go through that process, I would not be where I am now. And I'm about to go through something similar again, because I want to, like you said, I want to further improve this masterpiece, but I can't do that staying at maintenance. I need to eat into a slight surplus. I need to find that slight surplus by the art of reverse dieting from maintenance to surplus. And that's the thing. I don't just slab on an extra 500 calories. We're trying to find it there. And I'm enjoying the process. I'm loving the gym. I'm not hung up about the same things I used to be. And this is where you want to live. Like, think about that. Like, even just pause this podcast and imagine what life would be if you didn't spend all of your waking hours feeling guilty over indulging in freaking chocolates and cookies and choc chip cookies and even alcohol because of the situation you're in within your life and within your own body. Because it all is part of the same thing. Imagine a life where you're actually loving the life that you live in. You're confident. You're happy with however your body fluctuates, and you don't let a painful, huge feeling belly on your period throw you off down the course back into yo-yo land. This shit matters, and it's why I also set the timestamp for when we started talking about this, because this part of the conversation is the most fundamental. No body changes that are permanent can be made on an unhealthy relationship with your body, which is the fundamental part of an unhealthy relationship with food. It all comes down to your relationship with yourself. You can tie it off from there, because that was perfect. Thank you.
I wanted to clarify some misconceptions about body image, because every time you bring up body image, a lot of people will turn off because they will think it's airy-fairy, that it encourages the development of unhealthy habits and obesity even. And that couldn't be further from the truth. If some people are pushing those kind of messages, it's because of a distortion of the original research done on body image. When you have a positive body image, what it means is that you separate yourself from your body, so you see your body as a part of you, you respect it, but you acknowledge that you want to change some aspects of it if you do, or you are honest about it and you realize that whether you want to change your body or you don't, you might have to. And this brings in a conversation about objectivity, which is sometimes you need to change your body if one of your goals is health. If you value health and you are overweight or you have obesity, then you may say, I don't necessarily want to change my body, but because I value my health, I am still going to, because being obese is going to compromise your cardiometabolic health, meaning it's going to put a strain on your heart, which can legitimately lead to death. over time. I don't want to be morbid, but I am also always blunt and honest. And so I don't want anyone to think that I'm giving this spiel about body image because I encourage being unhealthy and being happy with whatever amount of body fat you carry. Because again, if one of your values is health, and you may not value health, in which case this conversation doesn't apply to you. And I respect everybody's values. I'm not interested in judging you for anything, especially not your values. But if you tell yourself that you value health, then being overweight or having obesity is compromising that value. So having a positive body image can also mean deciding to go on a diet to lose the excess body fat while still respecting your body through it. So hopefully that clarifies one misconception. And then it's really important for me to also talk about is what can it actually mean to tackle body composition changes with a positive body image? Because if I just leave the conversation here, it seems very nebulous. Oh yeah, positive body image, I respect myself and I can do all the dieting, all the being a surplus, the training hard, and it all goes well. Well, it doesn't really mean anything. I want to give practical examples. If you have positive body image, you're not so bothered with the way your body changes, and you accept that your body will not always stay the same. It changes over time. If you have a menstrual cycle, it changes for a couple of weeks, a month when you get your PMS and then you get your period. It's going to look a bit more bloated during PMS, maybe. And then it's going to look less bloated when you're not suffering from those symptoms. And that is normal. And you acknowledge that it is normal. It's just what the body does. If you don't have a menstrual cycle, well, guess what? Or if you do or you don't, all that life is a slow decay until there's nothing left of us. So your body is going to change simply because you're getting older. And that's also normal. And if you have a positive body image, you can acknowledge that and normalize it. But you can also acknowledge that if you want to be in a surplus, your body will change accordingly in that you will get bigger and the number on the scale will change. And if you're in a deficit, the opposite will happen and your body will get smaller and you will weigh less on the scale. And you can normalize that as well, because I believe that the majority of us can accept that we're going to change because we get older and because if you have a menstrual cycle, because you have certain symptoms. But I think a lot of people struggle to accept that your body changes depending on your calorie balance over time. And when you accept that, you're no longer, what happens as a result? You're no longer obsessed with the scale. You're focusing on the daily habits that you need to put in place to lead to the change that you want to see. You are less impatient because you understand that, yes, you want more muscle, but that's going to take time. So you're not looking at the clock being like, when do I build an extra pound of muscle? You go into the gym, you do your sessions, you eat the food that you need to eat, and you're happy with the process of it, with how fun it is to wait for the changes to happen. And my mother, while I was growing up, would tell me, you know that the most fun part of Christmas is actually the lead up to it, because once Christmas comes, you open the presents, it takes like 10 minutes and then the presents are open and you get over them. And even then, I acknowledge, as a tiny kid who didn't understand very much, I understood that was true, because I was so excited the night before, the night of Christmas Eve. I always try to stay up to see Santa. Leading up to it, I was thinking, oh, I wonder what my presents will be. And then I would open the presents, I would look at them and be like, okay, these are cool, and then move on with my life. And if you're so focused on the outcome as opposed to the process, you don't get this excitement for Christmas to come. You're so focused on Christmas, meaning the physique that you're trying to build. Then let's say that you actually build this physique. You're going to look at it for 5 seconds in the mirror. You're going to go, hey, yay me, I got here. And then what? And then despair hits you, like this existential crisis hits you, because you're like, I've just spent all these years trying to get here. Now I'm here and I don't even care that much because it's literally just a look in the mirror. Whereas you're not going to get this existential despair. You fell in love with the process of training and of fueling your body, and you liked every day, or at least appreciated most days, because we don't always like training or eating, that's fine, but you appreciated what it was doing for you at the time. And that increases your quality of life, which in turn improves your mood. If you have a better mood, you're going to be more motivated to actually engage in these behaviors. If you engage in the behaviors, you're going to get the results you want. If you get the results you want, you get even more motivation. And to touch on motivation, people think, oh, I need to be motivated to get the results I want. That's not true. You need to start acting. The cycle isn't motivation, action, results. It's action, results, motivation, because we gain motivation from seeing that the effort we're putting in is yielding results. So when somebody tells me, oh, I need to, I'm not motivated, and I'm going to start when I'm finally motivated, you need to start now, because it's the only way to start getting motivated. And now you could say, well, I've tried to start multiple times. Well, the problem is that you were misplacing your efforts. And if you don't have the expertise to know where to place your efforts, which I completely understand, I've been studying this for over half a decade and I still have so much to learn about building muscle and losing fat. So I appreciate that you have another job. You're not a coach. You're not a personal trainer. You're not a dietitian. Of course, you don't have the time to dedicate to learning what is my full-time career. Then you need to hire a coach. And that's getting their professional help, their plan, their method, which actually is effective, is going to lead you. It's going to lead your actions to beget the results that you want. And that's when you're going to get motivation at last. And now I went on such a rant that I forgot the point I was going to make. Oh, yes. What does it look like to have positive body image? It looks like taking an efficient mindset and channeling it into the actions that you need to get the results you want. Because if you have an inefficient mindset, you're not going to get anywhere. And an inefficient mindset is a mindset whereby you're shaming yourself into dieting or training. Because we know, and there is research on this, I'm not talking out of my ass for the sake of being airy-fairy or because I'm a nice person and I want to be kind to everyone on a podcast. I am talking about legitimate research on motivation. We know that shaming yourself into action doesn't work. It might motivate you in the short term, it doesn't last. So developing a positive body image means that you're going to develop a more optimistic and a more positive attitude towards what you're trying to do, whereby you're going to start seeing eating in a certain way and exercising in a certain way as a way to respect your body, as opposed to a way to punish it because it doesn't look like the way you want. And it's only when you are thinking of these actions as a kind of self-respect act that you're actually going to stick with them. Because instead of thinking, God, here's yet another workout, here's yet another meal that I don't like, that I have to eat because I need to change my body, you're going to start thinking, here's that workout that's going to make me feel better because I've had a long day at work and I know that after the workout I'm going to feel less stressed. So it's an excellent way to treat myself. And here's this meal that has all the nutrients that I need to feel good in this body, to have the energy that I need to train, but also to live the rest of my life, because there's a lot more to life than just training. And we need calories and nutrients for all of it. And that is the end of my TED Talk.
This end of the conversation, it's just mic drop. It's everything that I was saying before in terms of this is when you start to make decisions based off the actions you need to take, based off rationale, based off logic, based on what actually gets you to the outcome, not because your mood says this, your sensations say that. You haven't yet learned. Like, once you do this the right way, you won't have to keep doing it over. Like, this shit is so important. It is not letting yourself go. It is the fundamental step to get to where you want to be, which isn't just a physique. It's to feel free within that physique, not like it is a friggin' shell that's enclosing you like a prisoner. This stuff is elating, it's electrifying, it's health magnifying if you allow it to be. But I just loved that whole end of the conversation. I really hope you guys take something away from this and trust the work that you're putting in. Three
And you can
steps.
tell, Ruby, that I agree with you that this is so important because, dear listeners, you might have noticed that I got really, really into the conversation. I got really impassionate as I was talking. I got so impassionate that now I'm red in the face. I am sweating, and I'm thinking, after this podcast, I gotta open a window because, man, I am a hot mess. But that's because it's so crucial to actually getting the results that you're after. Self-respect. That's where you need to start if you want to change the way that you look. And ironically, as I said before, get into a place where you don't care so much about the speed at which you get those results or how large or significant those results are. It doesn't really matter to you anymore because you find more enjoyment in the process of it.
I was just going to say, damn funking patience. That is all it takes. Because the reason we don't slow down to respect ourselves is because we just want to be there yesterday. Start with damn funking patience and then go from there. So with that, thanks, Nikias. I said it right now. Thanks, Nikias, for coming on. And his Instagram, I'm going to put below as well, but it's spelled Nikias. And Nikias, fit to transform. There's an underscore between them. So that'll be down below as well. I highly recommend that. Actually, if you watch his stories, you will see how hard he takes his sets. Kind of like me and the faces that I pull, you'll be seeing them 2 times over from a different perspective. So you can apply the effective sets and reps principle to your training as well. Anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to say thank you for sharing my Instagram. It's my name, Nikias _ fit to transform. That is actually a really good tip. If you want to learn what it's like, we talked about hard training and you were listening, dear listener, and you might have been thinking, yeah, okay, you're talking about failure, but what does it look like in practice? Follow people that you trust who train and look at the training that they post, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram or another medium, because it's going to give you an understanding of what it truly looks like to reach that close proximity to failure. A lot of my clients signed up to work with me because, and they told me, I have a question on my application form that asks them, why do you want to be coached by me specifically? And I kid you not, so many of them reply, because I watch your stories on Instagram and you train so much harder than me that you made me realize why I wasn't making any progress, because I never look like you when you're training. And so they wanted me to coach them to that point. So it does really help if you have somebody that you trust. Observe what their training looks like.
I would just quickly say, not YouTube. YouTube's dolled up and most of them have makeup on and they make it look too pretty. No, look at people's stories. Even Instagram posts, they're fancy shit. Look at people's stories in the midst of their actual training sets, what it looks like towards the final reps. But yeah, they will be seeing you train because I'm 4 weeks ahead or 5 weeks. Wait, no, I'm 4 weeks ahead, but I know that you're going to grab this podcast and put it up for yourself on yours as well. But for those listening, do so. Honestly, that's the best advice that I can give you. Don't want people's outcomes, want people's actions, because you'll never get the outcomes without the actions that led them to there. So with that, thank you for listening and you'll hear me on the next podcast. Bye.